Hello, and welcome to this episode of Be the Wolf. Today, I want to talk to you about sacrifice. If you have ever felt like you have sacrificed yourself for your job, for your business, for your relationship, and in the process, you felt like you lost yourself or lost part of yourself, this episode's for you. And I know for me, this was a standard way of operating. I would, if it was my job back in the days when I had jobs and I worked for other people, I would give up everything for that job. I would work all the time. My grandmother always called me a workaholic, and I was. And I would give up doing things that I wanted to do. I would give up going to my friends' weddings. I would give up taking time off to do fun adventures with people. If it required me to give up a little bit of work, I would not do it. And I would give everything to the job. I, in fact, had one boss who was such a train wreck that he went out of town and I did everything I could to get his business back in working order. I was a manager at the time. And so I got the phone turned back on. I went through over 6 months worth of mail that he hadn't opened. And this is pre paperless billing. And I organized all of his expenses and all of his things in the hopes that he would start paying us again, in the hopes that we would come back, or he would come back from his vacation and we would have a boss that would actually take care of business. And I even slept there at the job so that I could get all that stuff done in the weekend that he was gone. And of course, no surprise for any of you that have ever sacrificed like that for somebody, no surprise that all my efforts were not appreciated. All my efforts did not change anything. And maybe you have had times where you have put so much effort in. You've helped your partner while they worked on their dreams, and you sacrificed and you gave up and you worked 2 jobs, you worked more so that they could fulfill their dreams. And then once their dreams were fulfilled, boom, they were gone. Yeah, these were the things that I did in my life. And I want to talk to you about what's really going on with that sacrifice of self for others and for the job and the business. I know so many people who have given up the working life, working for other people so that they could start a business because they didn't want to work for other people and they wanted to do it their way. But over time, they ended up sacrificing even more to the business than they were sacrificing to their jobs. And I know for me, I did that for a while. But there's this place, I want you all to know that there is this place, this sweet spot where you can actually take care of your needs first and the other things work. And I know at a nervous system level, it feels if you don't do all of the things and if you don't take care of everybody and everything all of the time, that everything is going to fall apart and it will crumble and life will be terrible. I know that it feels that way. But the truth is, and this may not be easy for some people to hear, the truth is that's exactly what you have to do to make it all work, is let it all crumble. And that is not a fun process, my friends. I'd love to tell you, you just wait a minute. What's happening when you stop taking care of everybody else and everything else is you have to go through some internal alchemization in order to get to the other side. And the key is if you're strong enough, you can actually get to the other side. And I want you to know every single one of you is strong enough. But you have to believe it and you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort. So I'm just going to start by sharing some stories because I think I know we learn at a deeper, more subconscious level through story. So for me, I was super hyper independent. I pushed people away. I kept people at arm's length because historically I got hurt. But what would happen sometimes, somebody would wiggle their way into my heart and I would fall for them. And then when I fell, I would fall hard. And there would be this point when it was like the relationship was locked in. I'm going to talk about relationships first. I'll talk about business and jobs later. But when the relationship was locked in, all of a sudden I switched from being hyper independent to being codependent. So I remember my first he wasn't my first love, but he was my first love that I thought I would marry. And there was this point in the beginning where I was like, "Oh, you don't want to date me. I'm just going to hurt you." And I was trying to push him away, but he stayed. He stood through me trying to push him away. And then there was this point in the relationship. I don't know how many months in, 3, 4 months in, 2 months, I don't know. But there was this point where he looked at me and it was this beautiful moment. We had definitely been falling in love and the relationship was really healthy at that point. From an outside perspective, looking back, it was really healthy. We were both free to do what we wanted. We also spent every day to every night together, but there was no clinging. There was no trying to control the other person. There was none of that. And he looked at me one day and he said, "If I had more money, I would marry you tomorrow." And it was like a record scratch moment. I was like, huh? And I freaked out inside because here I was in this relationship that was like loose and lovely and free. And all of a sudden, there's this, oh shit, here is this thing that could be forever. And internally, I freaked out. I'm like, do I want that? Do I want to be with this person? Do I want, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, internally, there was this pressure to decide if I wanted to be with this person. And marriage is forever, right? So then locked in. So I decided I loved him. I loved him so much and I wanted to marry him. And so I took a deep breath. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, this is it. This is going to be the one. And I was never the person that thought you could love somebody enough to want to marry them. But I wanted to marry this person. And so here we are. And then something changed within me. I didn't realize it at first. It took some time. But all of a sudden, I started to worry when he would go out with his friends. I would worry if he would hang out with other people. And he would say, "Oh, I'm going to hang out with Ryan today." And I would be like, "Oh." And I would lay this fucking guilt trip. And that was not how I was previous to this marriage comment. But somehow in this, oh, we're locked in, this is going to be forever, all of a sudden it changed. And so I started getting needy and I started getting clingy and I started getting codependent. Went from hyper independent to codependence. And what I didn't realize at the time was something had snapped inside of me that looped me back to a time when I didn't have all the things that I needed. So that message of forever, marriage, locked in forever, looped me back to my childhood, looped me back to a time where I was dependent on my mom to provide for my needs, to provide for my safety. And there was this part of me deep inside, like I was hyper independent and pushed people away as a way to provide for my safety, as a way to stay safe, because internally I didn't feel safe. I grew up, if you've been following me for a long time, I grew up not feeling safe. I grew up in an abusive household with neglect, with emotional abuse, with big traumas that happened that were outside of my control. And so I had this sense inside of me that I could not provide my own safety. So I created strategies and mechanisms to keep myself safe. And one of those ways of being safe was to push people away. But then once we took that mechanism out, oh, I'm going to let this person in. Now I'm just stuck with the fact that I don't feel safe. And now I'm allowing this person to keep me safe. And here's one of the things that I didn't mention is some point in this relationship, he had talked about keeping me safe and being the one who would provide for my safety. And he studied martial arts. And so I felt very safe around him. I felt like he could keep me safe. And that was part of why I surrendered. I surrendered into this aspect of letting him be the source of my safety. And this is where it becomes codependent because, in truth, I didn't feel like I could keep my own safety unless I was pushing people away. That was my strategy to stay safe, was to keep people at an arm's length. But now I had let this person in. So now this person who said they could provide for my safety was the source of my safety subconsciously. This was not a conscious thing, y'all. And yet, some of you might look at your relationships or your relationships with your jobs, things like this, and might see a similar thread. So I surrender into thinking this person is the source of my safety. And then I become dependent on him. And I'm dependent on him for my safety. And again, this is not conscious, but I become, if I don't feel safe and secure, then I needed to cling on to him. So those moments when he would go out with friends, and it would make me feel not safe and secure because I felt subconsciously like I couldn't provide for my own safety. So if he wasn't there, I felt unsafe because subconsciously I was using him to fill up the part of me that could keep me safe. And there's some in the polarity and gender conversations, there's some coaches out there who say that the man has to be a certain way to provide safety and make the woman feel safe, and then they will surrender. And I used to get triggered as fuck hearing that. Don't you fucking, yeah, I will not surrender to you, blah, blah. I would feel this anger towards these coaches who were saying this stuff. But the fact is, it was true for me because internally I didn't feel safe. And when somebody made me feel safe enough, I would surrender and I would surrender all my autonomy. And that's what I did in this relationship. And became codependent. I surrendered my autonomy to this person who I thought would keep me safe, who subconsciously I felt would keep me safe. I surrendered and traded my autonomy for safety because internally I didn't feel like I was safe because I had a lot of subconscious, deep repressed emotions of feeling unsafe because I had a crazy childhood that was overwhelming. And so I didn't process a lot of that. And I need to say, this is really important for those of you who did not have a crazy childhood, but maybe still have fallen into this codependency, still have felt unsafe. If you're worried about whether a place that you live is safe, if you're worried about neighborhoods being safe, if you're worried about people being safe, it's a good sign that subconsciously you don't feel safe. And so you need to create your surroundings to be safe because there's the part of you that can keep you safe has been repressed and buried, whether it's buried in unprocessed emotions, whether it's buried in how you're allowed to be. A lot of women are not allowed to be strong and powerful and tough. So there is this sense that they are the weaker sex. And it's not that they're actually the weaker sex. Physically, yes, a little bit weaker. But the fact that through the generations they have been bred to be the weaker sex, that they're not allowed to show that strong, powerful aspects of who they might be. And so, because a lot of women have disowned those parts of themselves and shoved those parts of themselves down, they feel unsafe and they feel like they need somebody or something outside of them to keep them safe. And a lot of this, especially for women, is generational because it's been passed down through the generations of how a woman should be. And just like for a man, it's been passed down for men about how a man should be. And traditionally, historically, in relationship, there was this give and take. People always talk about how the other person completes you because in theory, you are attracted to people who exhibit the qualities that you have suppressed yourself. So for me as a woman, I had suppressed and it had been beaten out of me the way of me keeping myself safe. And so me being the person that provided my own safety didn't really exist. I shoved it down and it was exaggerated in this hyper independence when I was single. But when I was in relationship, I would surrender that strategy and let the other person keep me safe instead of just being the person who embodies safety. When I'm single, that would mean being safe and not pushing people away, not having to operate that way. And when I would be in relationship, it would mean being independent in relationship instead of codependent. There is this balance when I welcomed in the parts of me, the aspects of me that can create my own safety. This codependent hyper independence pendulum swing stopped happening. And so we tend to attract in people who are who seem to embody the things that we have stuffed down. And so remember, this aspect of me, this hyper independence, was an exaggerated way of providing my own safety. It was not in any shape and forms balanced and coming from a place of feeling safe. It was coming from a place of feeling unsafe. And the pendulum swing was also coming from that codependence, was coming from a place of feeling unsafe. So, two strategies, same internal feeling. And so for me, it was the root problem was that I didn't feel safe within myself. And I didn't feel safe within myself because I had all these unprocessed feelings of fear that were living inside of my body because of overwhelming experiences from my own life and overwhelming experiences from the generations before, because the generations and a lot of this unprocessed emotion has been passed down through the generations, through the womb, generation after generation. And historically, in relationship, it was the man would provide safety and the woman would provide emotional safety. And so there would be this like the two people complete me, like the two people become one. And you end up with sort of one person and what everything that's been repressed, and one person is what the other person is showing in an exaggerated form, and vice versa. And so the more repressed some of those emotions and stuff are, the more exaggerated you will be attracted to. So, for instance, people always talk about the empath and the narcissist relationship. So, the more empathic and internalized, an empath basically takes on everybody else's feelings. So if they're taking on everybody else's feelings and they're internalizing it like, oh, I'm the one who's wrong, and believing that they're the source of the problem. I'm the person who's wrong, you're right, and I'm going to take on your emotions and be responsible for your emotions and bend myself into whatever shape I need to be in order to make sure that you're emotionally safe and calm. That the more extreme you do that, the more extreme your pattern of that is, the more extreme of a narcissistic type of person you will attract. And the narcissistic type of person is the person who does not take responsibility for their own emotions. Their emotions are everybody else's fault. The empath makes everybody else's emotions their fault, and the narcissist makes everybody else's emotions or everybody else the fault of their emotions. So it becomes this very, really good fit, right? I had an ex who I was the empathic type of person, and my ex couldn't handle his emotions. So when he would have an emotion, he would come up with some reason why it was my fault. And as the empath, I just believed everything was my fault and I took on everybody else's emotions. So I always believed that I was wrong. And so he would go on and eventually be able to convince me that I had done something wrong. And now he has an escape for his emotions. And I'm feeling like shit about myself. And then, but I want to say there's two sides to this empathic, narcissistic coin because people always think and blame the narcissist. But what happens, so for me internally, if I had an emotion, if I felt him having an emotion, I would scramble and do whatever I could, people please, and bend myself and do whatever I needed to do in order to make him feel better so that I wouldn't have to feel the uncomfortableness of him feeling a negative emotion. And so I manipulated just as much trying to get him to feel better as he manipulated trying to make me the source of his problems. And the problem is it's the same problem, two different strategies, but the source of the problem is one feeling. It's like this internal emotion that somebody doesn't want to feel. And so it's exactly the same problem, two different strategies about how to deal with it. I'm going to be codependent and do everything I can to make sure that you're okay so that I don't have to feel the emotions coming up within me. And the other one is I'm going to make it your fault. So if it's your fault, then I don't have to feel the emotions. So two strategies, one problem. And so if you're sacrificing, this is the dynamic that's happening typically. It's that there is a source problem that you're not dealing with that's internal, and you are doing a strategy of sacrifice in order to make some emotional stuff go away. So for me, I did the same thing with safety when it came to work and when it came to jobs, right? Money is the source of our safety, we think. And so I would sacrifice for money. I would bend over backward for my jobs. I would do whatever it took to make sure my boss was okay. And I had some good bosses, but I had lots of bad bosses because you can imagine, just like I talked about, we tend to attract the opposite of what we project, right? So I would project hyper independence. So I attracted a lot of bosses who were needy and incompetent. So because when I was providing for myself, not in a codependent relationship, I was exerting that hyper independence thing. And so I would take on everything and I would take on so much work. People talk about what is it? Scope creep. But I didn't actually have scope creep happen because my boss kept giving me more work to do. I had scope creep happen because I saw things that needed to be done and I would just get them done because I would be typically attracted to incompetent bosses and incompetent people that would not get stuff done. And now, if you're a business owner and you have that hyper independence and that workaholic nature, you will also attract people who are operating on the opposite spectrum, because subconsciously you're trying to find that balance between the two. And so you will pull in people that have the same frequency, but are doing the opposite strategy. So even though they interviewed really great and they looked great on paper and they performed really well at the beginning, then they'll slack off and not be that great later. And it's not because you hired the wrong person, it's because you hired the person that has the same frequency as you. They just exhibit a different strategy. And so, this is why it's so important to do the work that brings you back to wholeness. Because if you're not in wholeness, if you're not operating from more of you, if you're not reclaiming those aspects of you that have been repressed and shoved down, you're going to attract people with the opposite strategies, but the wound and the frequency is the same. Like the empath and the narcissist are two sides of the same coin. The problem is the same. And together, it seems like they can create wholeness. But in truth, it's both people losing themselves to the sacrifice or to the eating somebody up, right? One person sacrifices all of who they are and the other person just eats it up. But both people are a shell of who they truly are because they're operating from this exaggerated aspect. So for me, one of the hardest lessons for me, but it was one of the biggest turning points, is in my business, I had been doing everything right. I was working on this marketing, and my marketing coaches were like, "You are so good at this," but nothing was working. Nothing was fucking working. And I don't even like to admit this, but my business was failing. And I was trying so hard to do the right thing and say all the right things in my marketing, but it wasn't landing. It wasn't resonating with people because I was trying to do the right thing and say the right thing, right? Exactly how I had been in relationship, exactly how I had been in jobs, and all that stuff worked to a degree, but over time it was like me sacrificing myself. I wasn't saying what I really thought. I wasn't marketing to what I really wanted to market to. And there was this point when my business was falling apart and I had maxed out on my credit again, and I put another month of rent on my credit card, and I was just freaking out. I didn't know what to do. And I had the biggest meltdown. And in this meltdown, I was like, what am I going to do financially? And I thought to myself, there's this account that's not technically mine, but I have access to. And I decided I was going to take money from that account. And now, this wasn't the first time I have taken something, but I felt like my back was against the wall so hard that this was my only choice. And this is sacrifice is one side of the coin, taking is the other side of the coin, right? This is like the person, the empath and the narcissist. The empath sacrifices and the narcissist takes is the standard thing. And for me growing up, I always felt like my mom took. Everything that I gained, she took away from me. And so it was the epitome of everything I didn't want to be, because I had suffered that pain of somebody taking from me over and over again. And I didn't want to be a taker. I didn't want to be a taker. But here I was in this position where I was going to take. I was going to take something that wasn't mine. And it was this breaking of everything I thought I was going to be, or everything I thought I was. And I It was, oh, just even hard to go back to this, like accepting that I was going to do this. And the thing is, I had done this before. I had taken money from this account years before, but I hid it. And I did it in this way where it was a secret, and I hid it through a big wall of shame, and I wasn't going to tell anybody, everybody, and I was going to scramble and try and figure it out and put the money back. And this time was different because I was going to take it. And I knew I would eventually pay it back, but I wasn't coming from this, oh my God, I have to scramble and get this stuff. I was going to actually just take the money for the well being of myself, and I wasn't going to worry about the rest. So I was going to do it in this different way, and I was going to do it from this place of acceptance. And I had to do some internal work to get to this point where I was going to actually take and do what was necessary to keep me afloat. And this is the thing, is coming from somebody who sacrifices everything all of the time. I was going to do what needed to be done to take care of myself. And I was doing it in this shitty way. I was taking from somebody else, but I had to come to terms with the fact that I was a taker. Because in the past I had taken, I had stolen, I got caught shoplifting multiple times. I used to steal money from my mom's purse. There was a history of me being a taker. When I stole money from my mom's purse, I stole money for food because I was hungry, because literally there was no food in the house. Not because there wasn't money. My mom's purse was full of money, but because there was no food in the house. And so I took, I took, I stole when I was young to get my needs met. And I got punished, and I didn't want to be a taker. So I shoved the part of me that was a taker down. I shoved it down and didn't accept it. And so those times that I did take, when I did steal, when I did take from that account previously, I did not admit that I was a taker. But this time in my meltdown, I admitted that I was a taker, and I had to look at and really accept the part of me that was a taker. And it was hard. And that process actually led to a lot of the work that I do now. But I had to sit with these really uncomfortable sensations. And in that process, this was the birthplace of a lot of the work that I do now. In that process, something changed in me. I welcomed this taker part back into me. And after a little while, it began to integrate. It took a couple weeks, and a couple weeks later, all of a sudden I was like, holy shit, I exist. I exist as somebody separate than other people. I didn't have to sacrifice myself and rely on other people in order to get my needs met. So welcoming the taker part of me back inside of me allowed me to feel like I existed, allowed me to become more whole. And here's the thing. When I stuffed that taker part of me down, the part of me that took care of my own needs, that took care of my own safety, when I stuffed that part of me down, I had to exaggerate the opposite thing in order to get any of my needs met. I had to sacrifice and be the empath and take care of everybody else and put everybody else's needs first in hopes that they would take care of me. It was not a direct path because I didn't want to be the taker, because being the taker came with punishment, because being the taker was horrible to other people. And I didn't want to be that. So I shoved it down. But then I exaggerated the sacrifice part. And by exaggerating the sacrifice part, I became out of balance. And when I welcomed the taker part back into me, when I became more of my whole self, when I became more of the wolf, when I accepted the fact that I can take, all of a sudden I was able to take the actions that needed to be taken for my business, and things started to work. I was able to take the actions that I needed for myself, and money started to come in. It took me accepting those parts of me that I had disowned, that were forbidden, in order to actually move forward in my life, because the sacrifice strategy wasn't working. I had sacrificed in this whole marketing program I acquiesced to what I thought my marketing coach wanted, the same way I did in relationship, the same way I did in jobs. One of my mentors says that how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you're sacrificing in relationship, you better bet you're fucking sacrificing in your job. You better bet that you're sacrificing in your health, because, and maybe it's not as noticeable, but how you do one thing is how you do everything. I sacrificed for safety. I sacrificed being thin for safety, because I needed my family to love me, because I had overheard them talking about were how skinny girls didn't realize how hard life was, that they didn't, because I had overheard one of my family members talking shit about skinny girls. But yet, on the other hand, my mom had always talked about how I had to keep my weight under control and could not get fat. So there was this sweet spot of safety that allowed me to stay safe with my weight, because if my family didn't love me, they wouldn't take care of my needs. And therefore, I had to sacrifice what was right for me. I had to sacrifice having the optimum shaped body, the optimum body that I felt good in, because I needed to make other people happy, because other people were the source of my safety, because I could not provide it for myself, because I had disowned the parts of me that could keep me safe, the parts of me that were a taker, which is also the part of me that can take action and make things happen. And it's not like I have to take from other people to do that. I never did. But when I repressed it so much, that would be the only way that it could come out. Oh my God, the sacrifice strategy isn't working. So the only strategy left is to take, and it would come out just as imbalanced as the sacrifice strategy. Just like you attract the people that are the equal opposite of the strategy that you're performing. Instead of, let's own all the parts of us and bring them in so that we can stop sacrificing and actually create and build the life that you're fucking meant for. You can tell I'm a little passionate about this. And all that pain and all that hurt from feeling like I sacrificed all of my life, and to come to the realization that it was all me, that I was the one who made the choice to sacrifice because I was afraid of the consequences that had happened in the past. If I actually stood up for what was right for me, if I did what was right for me. And some of this was my experience, and some of it was stuff that was passed down through the generations. But it has always been my responsibility to deal with that and to bring it in balance, to bring myself back into wholeness, to be the wolf, to be all of me. Because if I'm not operating from all of me, I'm only going to attract half of the life that I'm meant for. And in that, it's probably going to be fucking distorted, because the parts of me that I'm allowed to use have been working overtime, because the other parts that balance them out and keep my body and my system in harmony have been disowned and disqualified. And so my life is going to look a distorted way of a match of who I am, versus if I bring in all of the parts of me that I have been disowning, then I will actually operate from a wholeness of who I truly am, a harmonized version of who I truly am. And in that, the reflection of the life that I create is the life that I'm meant for, the life that actually feels good to me, that feels vibrant, that lights me up, that makes me excited to wake up every day. And I'm lucky because I have reclaimed enough of myself. That's how I wake up every day, excited and thrilled and happy to be here and just excited about what every day will bring. And I'm getting emotional about this because it wasn't always like this. And it took so long to figure out how to bring myself home to me, to create a life and build a life that actually feels like it's meant for me instead of one that's sacrificing for everybody else. Okay. Thank you all for listening to my soapbox rant today. If you want to participate in this reclaiming of yourself, of being the wolf, so that you can stop sacrificing and start living the life that you're meant for, there's lots of ways you can do that with me. You can keep listening to my podcast, follow me on social media. You can come to my weekly Be the Wolf calls, 7 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. And the links will be down below. And come to my live events. I do firewalks and I do transformational events in California, in LA area. So those are great things to do. And you can reach out to me for coaching, of course. There's lots of ways to get involved, but no, I need you all to know that those parts of you that have been shoved down, forbidden, that you were told were too much, too wild, too wrong, all of those parts of you deserve a place in your ecosystem because they are the key to actually creating the life that you're meant for, the life that is truly meant for you, the life that feels amazing. All right. Thank you all for listening, watching to this episode of Be the Wolf, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.